right. Well, let's do a little bit of a history lesson here, because
trip down memory lane.
Yeah, Nando, it's amazing, and I know this is something that frustrates you. It seems like Americans have completely forgotten how disastrous Bush-era politics were. And now it's gotten to a point that people in Congress who experienced it in real time are advocating for similar actions in the Biden administration. So I wanted to make my case about that. So immediately after the Senate voted to acquit Donald Trump for inciting an insurrection in the Capitol on January 6th, Americans heard this bipartisan chorus of lawmakers who are demanding what's being referred to as a 9/11 style commission in order to investigate the events of that day. And here's what that chorus sounds like.
There was a pre-planned element to this attack, Mr. Wallace, that we need to look at. Did Nancy Pelosi know on January the 5th that there was a threat to the Capitol? What did President Trump do after the attack? We need a 9/11 commission to find out what happened, to make sure it never happens again.
I think there should be a complete investigation about what happened on 1/6. Both why was there not more law enforcement, National Guard already mobilized, what was known, who knew it and when they knew it, all that, because that builds the basis so this never happens again in the future. I think that is also important, George, but that is different from allowing that to define the future of the Republican Party.
Senator Coons, you just heard Congresswoman Dean right there on the necessity of a 9/11 commission. You agree?
I do. George, this was a remarkable week, a powerful week. And I think the House managers, obviously Congresswoman Dean and Congressman Raskin, and a very talented team put on an incredibly compelling and powerful case. But there's still more evidence that the American people need and deserve to hear.
Now, following all of these statements, you can expect the corporate media to just simply regurgitate this call for a 9/11 type commission. Opinion peddlers talk about the absolute necessity in order to prevent domestic terror attacks in the future. And naturally, everyone who seems to support the idea of a 9/11 type commission in order to do this investigation seems to have their own interpretation of what it means. What will this commission investigate? What will it look into? And Democrats, by the way, seem to think that this commission will carry out the justice against Donald Trump that they were unable to get through the Senate impeachment trial because of the fact that he was acquitted. Some, like Democratic Representative Eric Swalwell, are under the impression that the commission will help investigate and root out white supremacy in the United States.
We have to take a approach that we took after September 11 and root out white nationalism, terrorism from our country. I do believe we need a September 11 style commission. Take it outside of Congress. I don't want this in Congress, frankly. I think it should be an independent commission appointed outside of Congress from scholars, experts, statespersons who can tell us, what happened and how we can defeat it.
And you know that this is already becoming incredibly political in nature and nothing more than a vehicle for more political and partisan campaigning when you hear from the GOP and what they believe that this commission should be used for. It also provides them an opportunity, or provides cover for the fact that they refuse to hold Trump accountable. It gives them the opportunity to signal to the country that while they were willing to acquit Donald Trump, they took the attacks on January 6th very seriously, and they want a full-blown investigation to figure out what's going on. In fact, former Indiana Governor Tim Romer, who served on the original 9/11 commission, brought up Senator Mitch McConnell's Senate floor speech immediately following his vote to acquit Donald Trump. And he believes that, hey, you know what? Even though he acquitted Trump, it's not a big deal. Mitch McConnell clearly, based on that speech, takes this situation very seriously. Here's Tim Romer's specific quote where he says, Senator McConnell's floor speech the other day certainly leads people to believe that he shares the frustration with the spread of these conspiracy theories and has deep concern about the need to strengthen the role of Congress as an institution and critical democratic participant moving forward. And I want you to really think about those words and how there is going to be a concerted effort to solidify power and expand power, not just among congressional lawmakers, but more importantly, the surveillance state. And whenever you hear anything about modeling policy or modeling investigations based on what we did after 9/11, you should worry, because all we really did was expand the surveillance state, expand the security state, and infringe on the civil liberties of Americans. And I really want to make that case in this segment. So much like the aftermath of the after the 9/11 attack, politics, fear, and emotion are really driving this rush to pursue a new investigation, a new commission, based on the discussions surrounding how this commission will form and what it exactly will entail. It's evident that it'll be costly and ineffective at best, but damaging or even disastrous for our civil liberties at worst. For instance, just listen to the language that was used by Representative Swalwell later on in that same interview.
Speaking of investigating white supremacy and white nationalism, do you think that the intelligence community should make a shift towards focusing more on that after everything we've seen, rather than focusing on international terrorism? Is domestic terrorism something that really needs to be taken seriously, given what we saw on January 6th?
They're going to have to do both, and they're going to need, I believe, at the Department of Justice, a white nationalism task force to make sure that they are understanding at the earliest of ages how people are being radicalized, if there are, in fact, training camps. And in our evidence, we found that the Oath Keepers, a group in particular, that they do have like training camps and an initiation process, very much like international terrorist groups.
Oh, that's great. That means more surveillance. That means the formation of another intelligence community, as if we don't already have several. And it's not as if we don't already have intelligence agencies who are focusing on the issue regarding radicalization in this country, specifically right-wing radicalization. This was something that FBI Director Christopher Wray had even testified about years ago, back in 2019. Listen.
Just in the first 3 quarters of this year, we've had more domestic terrorism arrests than the prior year. I will say that a majority of the domestic terrorism cases that we've investigated are motivated by some version of what you might call white supremacist violence, but it includes other things as well.
So clearly, we have government officials, we have members of the intelligence community who are doing exactly what this so-called 9/11 type commission would do in investigating what took place in the nation's capital on January 6th. Why do we need to add more bureaucracy, more surveillance, and more funding and resources towards something that is just going to be a duplicate of what's already been done? And really the concern is that this will expand surveillance and, much like 9/11, use the fear-mongering tactics regarding terrorism in order to sell expanded surveillance to the American people. And to be clear, Americans have been indiscriminately spied on and tracked by intelligence agencies since, well, about 1945. However, there was a little gap when there were some privacy protections for Americans. This previously came to a head back in 1975 when the Church Commission responded to recently revealed revelations of a domestic spying network and served to curtail the security state's power through the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978, also known as FISA. Now, FISA was later a regulation that was violated by the NSA under the Bush administration. And it was certainly an issue that was basically provided the 9/11 Commission basically provided cover for through their own findings and their own investigation. So a quarter of a century later, 9/11 became the excuse for an unprecedented increase and expansion of the surveillance state. And that's likely what we would get through the recommendations of another 9/11 type commission that would give their recommendations following their investigation of what happened in the Capitol. So far, the general public knows very little about the nuts and bolts of what this commission would entail, but there are already some signs that this effort is quickly shaping up to be similar to the commission that preceded it. So Tim Romer, the former Indiana governor that I cited earlier, does not want this investigation to be narrow in scope. So for anyone who's under the assumption that this commission is just going to hone in on what happened on that specific day, understand that there is a growing call for a broader investigation that looks into how these right-wingers get radicalized. It's the same language that was used regarding Muslim radicalization. And what ended up happening is intelligence communities started spying in on Muslim students who were doing absolutely nothing wrong. All sorts of privacy violations occurred, and it was incredibly invasive. So again, to call back on those types of surveillance methods that resorted from an insane investigation that was too broad, I think is a really bad idea. So Tim Romer, by the way, said this. He suggests a broad scope looking not only at the January 6th attacks, but, quote, how we try to ensure the peaceful transition of power. What do we do to make sure that conspiracy theories and lies don't permeate our democratic system of information getting to people? And how we take bipartisan steps forward to strengthen our democratic institutions. And he goes on to give a pretty lengthy list of what else should come of this 9/11 type commission, saying what were the roles of social media, of disinformation campaigns and conspiracy theories leading up to it, planning it, sharing it, and inspiring people to be involved. A commission needs to look at the role of white supremacist organizations, their growth, their spread, their utilization of social media and the internet. How did they become part of this effort? How did they get such a foothold? Now, Representative Jim Clyburn wants this commission not only to be broad in scope, but he wants it to be exactly like the old one.
Talk about a 9/11 type commission. Let's make it the replica of 9/11.
Let's make it a replica of 9/11. And when House Speaker Nancy Pelosi was asked how this upcoming commission will be different from the 9/11 commission, she didn't talk about, maybe doing something to hinder invasive surveillance recommendations or anything like that. What she did focus on was the diversity of those who end up sitting on this panel or this commission. She says it'll be different from 9/11. What were there? 9 people, all white, 1 woman? It will look different. Oh, okay, great. So as long as the group of people calling for more surveillance on Americans is a diverse group, then I'm sure it'll be okay. We'll be fine under that scenario. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. And it should worry Americans that Nancy Pelosi's mind is dead set on modeling this after the previous commission. It's not because it wasn't diverse enough. The problem was that it existed in the first place and it recommended more surveillance. The 9/11 Commission served as an example of how ruthlessly a tragedy could be used as a political weapon to erode American civil liberties. What the 9/11 Commission really did was provide a rationale for the invasive and illegal government spying that was already taking place years prior to the release of their report in 2004. In fact, in 2001, right after the 9/11 attacks happened, the National Security Agency, NSA, under the leadership of Michael Hayden, was already conducting illegal wiretaps on American citizens with the help of Bush and Cheney. So in other words, that FISA law that I was referring to earlier was the very law, the very regulation that was meant to protect Americans' privacy. However, that law was violated by Bush and Cheney, and certainly the NSA, which wanted to bypass the FISA courts, basically preventing themselves from having to get a warrant before they start spying on Americans. So James Bamford writes about this in his book, Shadow Factory. And I want to give you a few excerpts that clearly lay out how problematic this was. The NSA would have to get a FISA warrant to begin targeting Americans, a process NSA Director Michael Hayden claimed was slow and cumbersome. Instead, he told the president he wanted authority to secretly bypass the court and begin monitoring all of the target's international communications immediately. In other words, in hot pursuit. The standards for what represented a rationale or reasonable intrusion into Americans' privacy had changed, Hayden said, as smoke billowed from 2 American cities and a Pennsylvania farm field. So Bamford continues to write that Hayden's real problem today, meaning back then when this was happening, was not so much velocity, speed, as it was volume. He wanted to be able to target thousands of people simultaneously, some briefly and some long-term, without the hassle of justifying them to anyone higher than an anonymous shift supervisor. Now, there was certainly some backlash when this illegal wiretapping was taking place. However, what the 9/11 Commission provided in their 2004 report was justification, was a rationale for this type of government spying, even though the spying was illegal. In fact, based on the ACLU's criticism towards some of the recommendations coming from the 9/11 Commission at the time, the commission only served to provide cover and justification. Here's what they wrote. The 9/11 Commission's most sweeping proposed solution is a powerful National Intelligence Director, NID, and a National Counterterrorism Center, NCTC, that would centralize power over both foreign and domestic intelligence collection agencies in the White House. Remember, Hayden reached out to Bush and Cheney in order to bypass the FISA courts. And they gave him the ability to do that. They gave him the green light to do the illegal wiretaps. What this 9/11 Commission recommended years later was that this is the way it should be. The intelligence community should be able to, get the green light from the White House, which of course is incredibly problematic. But let me give you more. The way in which the recommendation centralizes power over both foreign and domestic surveillance in the White House raises serious civil liberties concerns. Putting domestic national security surveillance in the hands of a top spy at the White House rather than a top cop at the Justice Department raises real risks of making sensitive domestic national security investigations a servant of the president's political or ideological goals. As outlined, the 9/11 Commission's recommendations would put too much power in a White House official with access to the agencies of government that spy on Americans. And unfortunately, the ACLU's fears did come to fruition, and they laid out exactly how the 9/11 Commission's recommendations would lead to increased and unnecessary spying on innocent Americans. They write that as proposed by the Commission, the National Intelligence Director's powers would include the power under the U.S. Patriot Act to set requirements for FBI wiretaps and other intelligence surveillance within the United States. Again, this means that one person, the top guy who's in the White House or works within the executive branch, would be able to give the green light for certain surveillance under the recommendations of this 9/11 Commission. Now, former Indiana Governor Tim Romer did brag about how all of these recommendations, or most of these recommendations, were implemented. And remember, he sat on that commission. Recently, he told Politico this: out of our 41 recommendations, I believe 39 and a half were passed into law. I believe that is unprecedented in these commissions' histories. In fact, in 2011, the 9/11 Commission complained that, a few of their surveillance measures had not actually been implemented yet. They wrote that the government has failed to put into action a broader screening process using biometric technology that checks individuals as they leave the United States and has yet to establish a standardized form of identification, the report says. In addition, terrorist detention guidelines remain unclear. So they were worried about that. Like, hey, the Americans traveling to and fro, we got to make sure they're good. Are we using this biometric data? And come on, we already know how invasive this surveillance has been. Traveling has become a complete and utter nightmare as a result of ineffective, by the way, expanded surveillance. And apparently the commission was also concerned that the government had not implemented or created a civil liberties board, which, by the way, never came to fruition. So I guess when Romer's talking about the half recommendation that was never implemented, he's probably referring to the Civil Liberties Board. Now, when it comes to building support for this upcoming commission, I want you guys to pay close attention to certain tactics and strategies that I can already see playing out. So in order to drum up public support, what we're going to hear from the media and from members of Congress is this notion that it's going to be this wonderful, independent, bipartisan group of individuals. They're not going to be democratically chosen in any way. They will be appointed by our members of Congress. And there's this idea that, they're going to make sure that this is not going to be political in nature or partisan in nature. It's just going to be a fair investigation. Here's what that looks like.
Speaker Pelosi says there's going to be a quote, outside independent 9/11 type commission to investigate what led to the attack on the U.S. Capitol.
Of course, there must be a full commission, an impartial commission.
Let's have some independent studies of exactly what went on, not just on January 6th, but what led up to that.
In reality, this upcoming commission will be partisan in nature. It will have an equal number of Democrats, equal number of Republicans, and it will be used as nothing more than a tool for politics, really. Is it going to resort in anything useful? No. Are the proposals for this commission in any way unique to what the government is already doing in investigating white supremacy or terrorist groups in this country? No. What it will be used for is whatever both political parties choose to use it for. They will use it for their political messaging. There's no question about that. And we saw the same thing play out when it came to the actual 9/11 Commission. We heard the calls for an independent body, a party that has an equal number of Democrats and Republicans, and this idea that as a result of that makeup, they will be fair and the outcome of their recommendations will be unbiased. But I do want you to check out what Mel Goodman, who was a fellow at the Center for International Policy, had to say about that at the time. He was pretty critical of this commission. Here's what he had to say.
What this country needed was an independent, nonpartisan commission. The commission wasn't nonpartisan. It was presented to us as bipartisan. Well, when you appoint a group of people, 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans, that is certainly not nonpartisan. And I would argue it isn't even bipartisan. What it is balanced partisanship. And you can look at the commission's report time and time again to see where the Democrats on the commission check the views of the Republicans and the Republicans on the commission check the views of the Democrats. So forget this notion that this was somehow a bipartisan commission. It wasn't. It was balanced partisanship, and it did a great deal of harm to the final product.
And that critique was something that was repeated by others, including Benjamin DeMont over at Harper's Magazine, who wrote, "In the course of blaming everybody a little, the commission blames nobody, blurs the reasons for the actions and hesitations of successive administrations, masks choices that, fearlessly defined, might actually have vitalized our public political discourse." So make no mistake, the only thing that's likely to come from this January 6th commission is the reinforcement or justification of current surveillance and possibly suggestions for more of it. It will be used as a vehicle for political posturing by both parties, and it will suck up resources at a time when Americans are told that the government can't cancel their student loans or provide robust economic relief during this pandemic, when so many people, tens of millions, have lost their income, and of course, the health care that comes along with their jobs. So to focus on this right now, I think, is a pretty horrendous thing to do. And to put any resources behind it is also awful. The commission had a total of 80 employees. It cost millions, tens of millions of dollars. And that might not seem like a lot of money right now, but if the focus is on pumping resources toward this commission as opposed to dealing with the actual crises that Americans are dealing with day to day, it's going to show us where the government's priorities are. We're already spending most of our resources on the military and the security state. It's about time we push back. And by the way, stop whitewashing and laundering the Bush era and the awful policies that resulted from this 9/11 commission.
Yeah, love to take a trip down memory lane and think about all the war criminals in the Bush administration and just how absolutely crazy that time was. I mean, Anna, we're not going to date ourselves, but you and I are old enough, unlike some people on this show, to remember the Bush era. You know, 2002, that was like, it was just absolutely insane. Like when people think like, yeah, the Trump era, like he's a total fascist or whatever. And it's like, yes, but like think about what was in the Bush administration, like, night and day, not even close. We're like the entire, because it wasn't just the White House. It was like every structure of American power was on board, including the liberal media at the time. There was very, very little pushback to all of this stuff, especially before the Iraq War kind of quote unquote turned bad. What I despair over, you know, seeing all this stuff about the, you know, this new version of a 9/11 commission is that the liberal impulse, the sort of Democratic Party / liberal impulse, is to look at all the abuses of the Bush administration in the wake of 9/11, you know, extraordinary rendition, people in Guantanamo who are most certainly
torture,
innocent. The mere presence of Guantanamo Bay in and of itself, the entrapment of young Muslims by the FBI, encouraging them to quote unquote become terrorists. It just like they see all that and they're like, that's racist. We should extend it to white people, you know, instead of seeing all that and reducing it, you know, like, no, it's like, you know, oh, white people never get called terrorists. And it's like, yes, that's true. But the solution is not to expand that web to include poor white people. No. It should be the complete opposite. It should be we should be reducing it. We should not be doing it to. We should not be the FBI should not be entrapping Muslims. You know, and yeah, go ahead.
No, you make such a good point. And honestly, if you want to see how in my opinion, the way that the discourse has devolved further since the Bush era is that back then there had to be this overwhelming effort to justify surveilling American citizens, right? When it came to surveillance of foreigners, when it came to unbelievably cruel, brutal treatment of Muslims, whether they're in the United States or abroad, that's okay. At least it's not American citizens, right? Yeah. The conversation has devolved further because now the cheerleading is focusing on spying on American citizens. And yes, the focus right now happens to be on white supremacy, but make no mistake, or white people, but make no mistake, much like the aftermath of 9/11, we were all indiscriminately spied on. Data was collected on us by the NSA. That was what Edward Snowden, of course, leaked back, I believe, in 2012. And so all of us become victimized. All of us end up paying the consequences of the actions by Trump, by his cronies, by his cheerleaders, whatever it is. And then the biggest irony, and I'll end on this, is the Boogaloo Boys and all these like anti-government militias. You happy? Like, are you happy, you morons? Like, of course, this is going to lead to more surveillance, more government power. And they provided content, material for our government to use in their fear-mongering to drum up support for this. So congratulations. You guys are fantastic. You're doing a great job.
Yeah, I mean, the conspiracy theories write themselves, right? That the Boogaloo Boys are actually an inside job or something. You know, I mean, if you watch the Fred Hampton movie that just came out, the Judas and the Black Messiah, this is like a perfect example. There's a very good scene in which the FBI agent, the guy Jesse Plemons' character, is talking to the Lakeith Stanfield character, who is the guy who betrayed Fred Hampton, and he was like, "Hey, man, like, listen, I took down the KKK. Like, I was like an FBI agent, kind of raiding the KKK." And then obviously what he does is then turn around and, you know, like he sees himself as like the brave defender against this kind of like white extremism, but then he goes around and turns around and destroys the Black Panther Party. I mean, like what's going to happen is the same exact thing. Like they're going to go after, you know, the Boogaloo Boys or whatever. And that they're definitely going to go after those people 100%, but they're also going to turn around and go after the left. I mean, that's just what these things are always designed to do, really, is like they're going to go after left. They're going to call, you know, I don't know, whatever, some union campaign, like extremists who are looking to subvert you know, the American system or whatever. And that's just the reality of what's going to happen. So yeah, that's
yeah, no, you're so right about that. And don't underestimate the intimidation that comes along with knowing that the government is collecting all of this data on you, or collecting, you know, your browsing habits, all of that. I mean, if you know that stirring the pot could lead to the government leaking embarrassing things about you, are you willing to be a vociferous activist for whatever cause you believe in? So I think it's a form of intimidation as well. And it's just disastrous. And to see people like Keith Olbermann was like one of the biggest Bush era critics. And now he's like on Twitter, he's like, we must have a commission. And it's like, what happened to you? Like,
because these people, Anna, these people are like, you know, we make fun of the conservatives for being like, you know, disgustingly partisan and just like defending whatever, you know, their guy does. But it's the liberals do the same exact thing. I mean, they do the same exact thing. It's just like when the other people, when it's just directed at the other team, we've sorted ourselves into the teams, and anything that, you know, hits the other team is good, justified, whatever. Like there is no principles. There is no kind of first order principles that we all adhere to or we stick to, no matter who is the person violating those things. Like it's just, you know, a dodgeball match, and we're all just separated on different, we're just throwing dodgeballs at each other.
Well, I mean, the Democrats have become very, very principled on fighting back against deficit spending. So that's the one thing that they're like genuine on that. But yeah, I agree with you.
There. Yeah.
And just to like wrap this up real quick, this is not to minimize what happened in the Capitol. As I've said, like we already have the tools to do what's necessary in response to that. Adding more government bureaucracy that will only expand surveillance is a bad idea. That's the whole thesis there.